Why it sucked to be a knight during the Bubonic Plague. The first sound that Edmund ever heard was the toll of bells. Not joyous bells, not wedding bells, not even the bright silver call of Easter morn, but the dull bronze groan of the church tower as it marked the hour of his mother's passing. The midwife told the tale years later. He was squalling in the cradle while his father knelt with his forehead against the cold floorboards of the manor hall, praying the Lord would not take the child as well. The Greyford Manor was no palace, not even a castle, just a squat block of stone on the edge of the fenlands, where mists clung to the reeds and the stench of wet earth never left your boots. His father, Sir Harold of Greyford, was of minor blood, a knight with a handful of tenants and more debts than friends. He'd seen battle in the Scottish wars, returned with a scar splitting his lip and a bitterness that seemed to soak into the household itself. Edmund's earliest memory was the cold. The hearth smoked more than it burned, and the rushes on the floor stank of dog piss. His nurse would wrap him in wool that scratched, and in winter his fingers grew red and cracked. But cold was not what he remembered most clearly. It was the silence. His father did not laugh, his elder brothers did not jest, and his mother was a portrait in a side chapel, stiff-faced beneath flaking paint, holding a painted lily that had long turned grey. By 7, Edmund understood he was expected to fill the gap she had left, not as a mother's comfort, but as the child who must not fail. "On your feet, boy." The words struck harder than the wooden stick. Edmund stumbled in the mud of the yard, his small arms aching from holding the shield too long. His father stood above him, the old scar splitting wider when he shouted, "A knight does not cry when struck. Up! You'll not shame me." Edmund swallowed tears. He hated the mud, hated the weight of the wood, hated the gaze of the few servants who dared look at their lord, drilling his youngest son like a soldier's recruit. But he did not drop the shield again. His father swung, and Edmund braced, the stick cracking hard against the board. His teeth rattled, but he kept standing. Later, when the bruises came up purple, the nurse would mutter, "He's a child, Harold. A child, not a charger to be broken." And his father would grunt, "Better broken young than soft forever." It was not love, but it was approval, and Edmund clung to it. Nights in Greyford were long. The fen winds moaned around the shutters. Edmund would curl beneath wool, listening to his brothers whisper in the next cot. Thomas, the eldest, already planning to inherit. Geoffrey, sly and sharp, laughing at Edmund's clumsy sword drills. Sometimes, though, when the nurse thought him asleep, he crept to the little chapel. There the painted Madonna watched with faded eyes. He would kneel, pressing his scraped palms together, whispering secrets. "Holy Mother, make Father proud. Make me strong. Let me wear iron like the stories." Once, in that cold silence, he thought he heard the painted lips move. Of course they had not. But in his boy's heart the promise burned. He was meant for knighthood. At 9, Edmund learned death. Not the painted saint's death, not the long-forgotten mother's death, but the raw kind that stank of shit and fear. A pig had broken loose in the fields, maddened, tusks tearing a tenant's leg. The men shouted, useless with sticks. Edmund's father strode forward with spear in hand. "Hold him!" Harold roared, and before Edmund knew it, he was shoved into the mud with the beast's bulk thrashing above him. He smelled its breath, hot and rank. His small hands grasped at bristles, his face pressed into filth, and then the spear punched through the pig's throat with a gurgling scream. When he rose, dripping in muck and blood, his father cuffed him hard across the head. "Next time you grab hold tighter." But later, in the hall, Edmund found a trencher of meat shoved toward him before anyone else ate. Pride and pain arrived together, and he began to understand they were the same thing. By 14, Edmund was long-limbed, knobby-kneed, still soft in the face but with hands scarred from work. He had fed the hounds, polished his father's mail until his fingers bled, learned the clumsy Latin chants the priest muttered in chapel. He had also learned that his father's lands could not hold 3 sons. The day came in the spring. Grey skies hung low and the mud was thick on the road. A rider came from Lord Branwick, the family's liege, bearing words. One son must come to serve as page, to rise as squire. "Not Thomas," said his father. "The manor is his." "Not Geoffrey," said his father, his lip scar widening in scorn. "That one's tongue is too sharp." So it was Edmund. His nurse wept, pressing a sprig of dried rosemary into his palm for luck. His brothers jeered, Thomas smirking, Geoffrey whispering, "You'll be mucking boots, not riding chargers." His father simply tightened the strap of Edmund's cloak, eyes cold but steady. "You'll serve, you'll learn, you'll bleed, and you will not shame me." Edmund mounted the pony they gave him. He looked once back at the manor, at the squat stones, the reed-choked fens. He thought of the painted Madonna. Then he turned his face toward Branwick's hall, toward the unknown years of labour and humiliation that awaited him. For the first time, the boy felt what a man feels when leaving childhood, the weight of expectation and the whisper of fear that he would never be enough. The first thing Edmund smelled at Branwick's hall was piss. The courtyard reeked of it, a stew of horse dung, dog leavings, and the acrid tang of men who drank more ale than they could carry. The banners of Lord Branwick's house, green balls on a field of black, hung limp in the damp wind. This was no shining Camelot of song. It was a fortress where stones sweated mildew, where servants sloshed buckets, where hens scattered underfoot. A groom snatched Edmund's reins before he could even dismount. Another boy, barefoot, filthy, with straw clinging to his hair, laughed. "Another pup for the kennel," he said, and spat near Edmund's boots. Inside the hall, the Lord's steward took him in with a sniff. "Greyford's son, is it? You'll earn your bread here. Pages scrub, squires serve, knights bleed. If you think to be a knight, you'll learn to scrub and serve first." So began Edmund's years of squirehood. At dawn he was roused by a kick to the ribs from an older boy. "Up, pup, the horses need feeding." He shovelled dung until his arms ached, fetched water until his back bent, polished armour until his nails cracked. His hands blistered, healed, and blistered again. Each mistake earned a cuff, each hesitation another jeer. When knights feasted, squires poured ale and wiped the dribble from their masters' chins. When knights hunted, squires ran behind with packs of hounds, scrambling through briar and bog. When knights fought, squires fetched their shields, patched their cuts, and swallowed their complaints. It was servitude dressed up as training, and Edmund learned quickly that no boy endured it without being broken first. His master was Sir Ewan, a thick-necked man with hands like oak roots. Sir Ewan was not cruel for pleasure, but for principle. When Edmund fumbled with the straps of his mail, Sir Ewan backhanded him so hard his lips split. When Edmund failed to keep pace during drills, Sir Ewan knocked him flat in the mud. "You want to wear iron?" he barked. "Then earn the strength to bear it." The older squires were no gentler. They tripped him carrying buckets, shoved him face first into troughs, mocked him as milk babe and nun's son. He learned to swallow insults like bitter bread, though sometimes at night he wept quietly into his straw pallet. For all the beatings, lessons came. He learned to curry a destrier until its coat shone like oiled wood. He learned the weight of a hauberk, how to sling it across his master's shoulders without tangling the rings. He learned to sharpen a sword so finely that it shaved hairs from the back of his wrist. Sometimes Sir Ewan taught him more gently, showing him how to tilt a lance, how to parry a cut, how to stand firm when a larger foe bore down. And when Edmund managed even a small success, a shield raised fast enough, a stroke parried true, he saw in Ewan's eye the briefest flicker of approval. That flicker kept him alive. One winter night, after a hunt, Sir Ewan and the other knights feasted. The squires stood along the wall waiting to serve. A knight tossed Edmund a bone slick with fat and laughed. "There's your feast, pup. Chew on it like the dogs." The other squires snickered. Edmund burned with shame, but bit into the bone anyway. He had learned that dignity was a luxury squires could not afford. Afterward, alone in the stable, he whispered to himself, "Someday I'll wear the spurs. Someday they'll not laugh." At 16, Edmund saw real blood. Sir Ewan's party rode to put down a band of poachers in the woods. Edmund followed with pack horses. When the men were cornered, one lunged at Sir Ewan with a dagger. "Shield!" bellowed Ewan. Edmund thrust the shield forward. The dagger clanged against it, jarring his arm. Then Ewan's sword opened the man's throat. The poacher's blood sprayed hot against Edmund's cheek. He stood frozen, staring as the body twitched in the leaves. His stomach turned, and he nearly retched. Ewan clapped his shoulder. "Good lad, you kept me whole." It was the first praise he'd heard spoken aloud. It tasted like iron and bile, but it was enough to keep him enduring. By 17, his arms had thickened, his voice deepened. The other squires mocked him less. Some even grudgingly respected him. He could heft a sword longer than most, could take a blow without flinching. One night, lying awake, he flexed his scarred hands in the dim firelight. They no longer looked like a boy's hands. For the first time he believed, truly believed, that he might one day wear iron not as a servant, but as a knight. But he also knew this truth. The chains of squirehood had already bound him. He was no free man. He was forged like a blade, hammered, bent, and tempered by other men's will. Whatever knight he became would be stamped with their marks, not his own. The first time Edmund wore a full hauberk, he nearly drowned in it. Sir Ewan barked, "Lift your arms," and the other squires dragged the iron shirt down over his head. The weight pressed his shoulders until he gasped. The links clinked like chains of a prisoner. He staggered under the load, sweat prickling instantly despite the winter chill. "Stand straight, pup," Ewan snapped. "If the iron bends you, the enemy will break you." So Edmund forced his back stiff, ignoring the way his spine screamed, ignoring the groan in his thighs. The mail hung to his knees, heavy as wet stone. By the time the helm was shoved down, his neck ached so fiercely he thought it might snap. He lasted half the drill before collapsing to his knees in the mud. The laughter of the other squires rang in his ears. Ewan only said, "You'll last longer tomorrow." And he did. Armour was one weight, a warhorse was another. The destriers were monsters. Taller than Edmund, eyes white-rimmed, hooves that struck sparks on cobbles. They hated him. They bit, they kicked, they rolled their eyes as if to mock him. But each morning he fed and groomed them until his arms stank of sweat and horse oil. Slowly, grudgingly, he learned their moods. How to whisper before he approached, how to keep his hand firm on the reins. One evening, after months of bruises, one great black gelding let him mount without tossing him like a rag. The rush of height, the power under him, the thunder of hooves across the yard. It was the first time Edmund felt a taste of the freedom knights sang of. The taste was fleeting. So Ewan unhorsed him with a single blow from a blunted lance, and Edmund woke in the dirt with blood in his nose. Training with sword and shield was worse. The weapons were iron, but dulled. They might not cut, but they bruised and broke all the same. "Strike him like you mean it," Ewan barked. So Edmund struck, again and again, until his arms burned, until his palms blistered raw. The older squires spared him no mercy. Blows rained from every side. The wooden shields splintered, the blunted edges cracked ribs, split lips, blackened eyes. At night he lay in straw, aching, unable to move. Sometimes he dreamed he was drowning, iron dragging him into the dark. But each dawn he rose when the horns sounded. That was the rule. That was the life. At 18, Edmund drew true blood for the first time. It was no battle, no glory. A merchant caught stealing timber was condemned to justice. Sir Ewan ordered his squire to carry it out. They gave Edmund a sword, sharp this time. The condemned man knelt in the mud, hands bound, eyes wide. He begged, "Mercy, lad, I've children." "Do it," said Ewan, flat. Edmund's stomach twisted, his hands shook, the blade quivered above the man's neck, the condemned wept. "Please." Ewan's hand clamped his shoulder. "Do it." So Edmund swung. The sword hacked through flesh and bone, lodging halfway. The body jerked. Blood sprayed across Edmund's face, hot and salty. He had to wrench the blade free to finish it. The man's head rolled in the mud, staring. Edmund dropped the sword and vomited. The other squires jeered. "Milk babe! Sick on his first swing!" But Ewan only said, low, "Better you learn now than in battle." That night, Edmund scrubbed the blood from his hands until the skin was raw. The stench clung anyway, it never fully left. When he turned 19, Lord Branwick's Hall hosted a small tourney. It was not the grand pageantry of kings, but for the squires it was a chance to prove themselves. Edmund entered the melee with blunted sword, his heart hammered as the horn blew. The field erupted in chaos, boys slamming into each other, wood on wood, shields splintering. He took a blow to the head that rang his skull like a bell. Staggering, he swung wildly and caught another squire across the jaw, dropping him. Blood poured from the boy's mouth. "Victory to Greyford's pup!" someone shouted. For a brief moment Edmund felt it. Pride, elation, the roar of approval. But later, when the boy he struck spat teeth into the mud, Edmund's stomach turned again. Glory was ugly, glory was pain. By 20, he had grown into his frame. His arms were corded, his back broad, his face hard. His hands bore scars of steel, his skin calloused from lash and sword. The torment of boyhood had burned away, leaving something leaner, harsher. The knights began to nod at him, not just as a servant, but as one of their own to be. Sir Ewan muttered less, cuffed him less. Sometimes, when Edmund held the shield steady, he caught the faintest smile on the man's face. The weight of iron still crushed him, but he carried it longer now, and in the marrow of his bones he knew. He was nearly forged. The dawn of Edmund's knighthood was damp, grey and ordinary. Crows squabbled over scraps in the courtyard. The cook cursed at a pot that had boiled over. The dogs barked at nothing. Nothing marked it as the day that should have been the crowning of his young life. No fanfare, no blare of silver trumpets. And yet in the chapel, waiting for the horn to call him, Edmund's chest hammered like a drum. He had survived squirehood. He had endured Sir Ewan's cuffs, the jeers of older boys, the stink of horses and the press of iron. He had swung his sword at men and animals both, and he had not broken. He bore scars now, a split lip, a jagged white mark across his hand from a blunted blade. But they were badges, not shames. Today he would become Sir Edmund. The night before, tradition demanded he keep vigil in the chapel. Alone, on his knees, sword laid before him, he whispered prayers until his throat grew raw. "Lord Christ, make me worthy. Holy Mother, keep my hand steady. St. George, lend me strength. St. Michael, give me courage. Let me not shame my father, nor my house, nor my Lord." He whispered until the candles guttered, until sleep dragged him into uneasy dreams. Dreams of the condemned man's head rolling in the mud, dreams of the poacher bleeding into the leaves, dreams of iron that crushed him into the dirt. At dawn, he woke stiff and shivering, but still on his knees. The hall smelled of smoke and sweat, of unwashed wool and roasted mutton. Lords and knights gathered, servants crowded the walls, and the squires, Edmund's old tormentors, now watched him with envy. Lord Branwick sat at the high table, a heavy man with eyes like flint. "Edmund of Greyford," he called, "kneel." Edmund strode forward. His legs shook beneath him, but he forced them steady. He knelt, sword laid across his palms. "Will you swear," Branwick intoned, "to defend the Holy Church, to uphold the law, to protect the weak, and to serve your liege with life and limb?" "I will," Edmund said, voice hoarse. "Will you swear to be merciful to the poor, humble to your betters, and faithful to your word, even unto death?" "I will." The words echoed in his ears like iron striking iron. Oaths, heavy as chains, binding tighter than any hauberk. Branwick drew a sword, not Edmund's, but the Lord's own. He tapped each shoulder, left and right. Then rise, Sir Edmund of Greyford, knight in the service of Branwick. Applause filled the hall. Brief, rough, but real. A servant brought forward gilded spurs, which Branwick buckled to Edmund's heels. The knights raised their cups, and just like that, it was done. Ale flowed, meat roasted, minstrels sang. Edmund sat lower down the table, no seat at the high dais yet, but higher than he ever had before. The squires who once shoved his face into troughs now poured his cup. "Sir Edmund," one said, sneering faintly as he filled the ale. The title was mockery in his mouth, but it was a title nonetheless. Edmund drank. The ale was warm and sour, but it was victory all the same. Yet, as the night wore on, he felt a hollowness under the pride. The hall stank of sweat and smoke. The knights at table argued over rents and taxes, not holy causes. One knight, red-faced with drink, shoved a servant girl into his lap, while the others roared with laughter. Edmund thought of the oaths he had spoken. To defend the weak, to be merciful, to serve faithfully. The words already felt fragile as cobwebs. Later that night, Sir Ewan sought him out. "You've done it, lad." Ewan's voice was gravel, but there was something almost gentle in it. He thrust something into Edmund's hands, a sword, plain but well-balanced, its grip worn smooth by long use. "My own first blade," Ewan said. "I've no sons. You've earned it." Edmund's throat tightened. I'll carry it with honour, sir." "See that you do." For all the scars and blows, for all the humiliation, in that moment Edmund realised Ewan had been more father to him than Harold of Greyford had ever been. When Edmund retired to his chamber, he unbuckled his spurs and set the sword across his knees. He should have felt triumphant. He should have felt whole. Instead, he felt the weight of iron more than ever, not on his shoulders, but on his soul. He had sworn oaths that already felt impossible to keep. He had taken a title that demanded he be more than a man, while he still felt the boy who once wept in straw and whispered to painted saints. He lay down, staring at the rafters, listening to the laughter and brawls echo from the hall. Tomorrow, he knew, there would be no shining quest, no golden dawn. Tomorrow there would be orders, duties, mud and blood. But still, he was Sir Edmund now, and no one could take that from him. The summons came not a month after Edmund took his spurs. Lord Branwick raised his banners, not for crusade, nor holy war, but for something smaller and meaner, a border feud with a rival baron who withheld rents and claimed timber rights along the river. It was no noble cause, just one lord's greed against another's. Yet the knights strapped on their swords, and the peasants were driven from fields to march with pikes. "War, lad," Sir Ewan said, tightening the straps of his gauntlets. "Glory, eh?" He gave a thin grin that was no smile. Edmund forced a grin in return, though inside his stomach twisted with nerves. He had imagined his first campaign would be a blaze of banners and hymns. Instead, it was mud sucking at boots, the groans of oxen dragging carts, the stink of salted fish already going bad in barrels. The army slogged through mire. Rain sheeted down day after day, turning roads to rivers. Edmund's cloak was sodden within the hour, his boots squelching until his feet bled raw. Peasants stumbled with heavy pikes, coughing, muttering prayers. Horses went lame in the muck. More than once, Edmund saw a body by the roadside, some poor wretch, dead of chill or hunger, before even meeting the enemy. At night the camp stank of smoke and wet wool. Men huddled around fires, gnawing on black bread that broke teeth. Rats scurried bold as dogs. Edmund lay shivering in his damp cloak, the weight of his mail like a curse. This was no shining ride into valour. This was misery. It came without trumpets, just a sudden shout in the trees, arrows whistling down. "Shields up! Sir Ewan roared. Edmund raised his own, in time to hear the thock of arrows striking. Men screamed, horses shrieked, rearing as shafts pierced their flanks. Peasant levies scattered, stumbling in the mud. The enemy charged, not knights in bright mail, but ragged men with axes, brigands turned soldiers. Edmund's first clash was blind chaos. His sword met another blade, the jolt running up his arm. Mud splashed his eyes, hands scrabbled at his shield. The stink of fear and blood choked him. Then he saw a face, a man not older than himself, teeth bared, swinging an axe. Edmund thrust his sword forward. The point caught under the man's chin, driving up into soft flesh. Hot blood poured down the blade. The man gurgled and fell, eyes wide, hand clawing at his own throat. Edmund froze, staring, breath ragged. He had killed before, the condemned man, the justice of law. But this was different. This man had been fighting to live. His eyes still clung to life as they dimmed. "Move, lad!" Ewan bellowed, shoving him forward. The melee raged. Mud turned to red slop beneath boots. Peasants wailed as they were cut down. Knights hacked and shoved, not in graceful tawny blows, but in grunting, desperate swings. When at last the enemy broke and fled, Edmund stood trembling, blood spattered across his face, his arms so weary he could scarcely raise his sword. Around him the field was littered with groaning men. Crows already wheeled above, waiting. Victory, they called it. The enemy retreated, leaving Branwick's men to plunder their camp. But victory tasted of smoke and bile. Edmund sat by a fire, staring at his hands. Blood still stained his nails. He could smell it even after washing. Copper, sharp and sour. Around him the camp roared with laughter and boasts. Men drank, knights clapped each other on the back. Women were dragged weeping into tents. Edmund forced ale down, but it only soured his stomach. He remembered the boy's eyes, the man with the axe, dying in the mud. He could still feel the give of flesh around his sword. So this was knighthood. Not shining armor, not noble quests, just mud, fire, screams and death. A week later, they rode through a village loyal to the rival baron. The peasants fled into the woods, but not before Branwick gave the order. Torch it, let him see what loyalty costs. Edmund watched as men set thatch alight, flames leaping into the grey sky. Pigs squealed, chickens flapped in panic, children sobbed in doorways until mothers dragged them out. He felt his stomach turn again. He thought of his own manor, Greyford, the stinking hearth, the reed-choked fen. He thought of how easily it could be his home in flames, his nurse dragged weeping. But he said nothing. A knight was sworn to obey. So he rode on, the smoke stinging his eyes, pretending it was only the wind that made them water. When they finally trudged back into Branwick's hall, gaunt and stinking, they were greeted as heroes. Branwick feasted them, boasting of the lands reclaimed, the enemy humbled. But Edmund felt no triumph. His mail was rusted with dried blood, his boots rotted, his sword nicked from bone and stone. His dreams of shining glory had drowned in mud. He was a knight now, yes, but he was beginning to learn the truth. A knight was little more than a butcher with a lord's blessing. It began, as most horrors do, with a story told over ale. The campaign was finished, the banners furled, and Edmund sat at Branwick's long table with the other knights. A trader from the southern coast had come for business, a lean man with eyes too wide and skin too pale. Between gulps of wine, he spoke. "They say in Sicily," he muttered, voice low, "a sickness has taken the ports. Men die within days. Black swellings on their necks and groins, fevers that burn them mad, coughing until blood pours from their mouths. Whole ships arrive with nothing but corpses, rats crawling over the decks." Laughter rang out. One knight snorted, "Southern men always die from wind and wine. Let them choke." Another added, "Every few years the priests claim a new plague. God tests us, we endure." Edmund forced a smile, but unease tugged at him. The trader's hands shook as he drank. That was no drunkard's tale, that was fear. Life returned to its rhythm. Edmund drilled in the yard, rode patrols through Branwick's lands, hunted in the woods. He tried to believe the tale had been just that, a tale. Yet whispers spread. Monks passing through muttered of whole monasteries emptied. Carters told of trade routes disrupted, markets shuttered. In the hall at night, Edmund overheard servants talking in hushed tones, bodies piled in the streets of Genoa, a sickness from the east, God's punishment. Sir Ewan scoffed when Edmund asked, "Men die every year. They'll call it pestilence, famine, witchcraft. It matters not. Fear travels faster than truth. Best not to listen." But Edmund could not shake the unease. One autumn morning, a merchant's cart arrived from the coast. Its driver slumped in the seat, grey-faced, sweating. His assistant waved for help, shouting, "He took ill on the road, fever." The man was carried inside. He shivered, teeth rattling, his neck swollen with a lump the size of a fist. His groin bulged with another, his breath rattled, stinking of rot. By nightfall, he was dead. The steward ordered the body buried outside the walls. No priest dared touch it. Servants muttered, crossing themselves, whispering of the trader's tale months ago. That night, Edmund lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. The hall felt colder than usual, the shadows longer. He remembered the man's swollen neck, his blackened tongue. On Sunday, Father Anselm preached in the chapel. His voice shook. "Brethren, we are punished. Our sins rise to heaven, and God sends pestilence to scour us clean. Pray, confess, scourge your flesh, lest the angel of death strike you down." The congregation murmured in fear. Some wept. Edmund sat rigid, hands clenched. He had been in battle, had seen men's throats slit, bellies torn, blood gushing in mud. But this was different. This was unseen, unstoppable. No sword could parry it. No shield could block it. And if it was God's wrath, what defense could there be? A week later, a kitchen boy sickened. His groin swelled, his breath rasped. Within 3 days, he was dead. Then the washerwoman who had tended his bed fell ill. Then the steward's wife, then 2 of the grooms. The grave diggers could not keep pace. Pits were dug in haste outside the chapel yard. Bodies tumbled in without prayers. The air itself seemed foul, heavy with the sweet, sick stench of rot. Edmund helped carry the steward's wife. Her skin was blotched black, her lips cracked and bleeding. She had once laughed in the hall, warm and kind. Now she was a husk. As he lowered her into the pit, flies buzzing thick around, Edmund whispered a prayer, but the words felt hollow, lost in the buzzing of the flies. The hall grew quiet. Feasts dwindled. Servants fled into the night, choosing hunger on the road over the shadow of sickness. Knights kept to their chambers, some praying, some drinking, some muttering of fleeing north. Sir Ewan sat sharpening his sword. "It's no curse, it's pestilence, aye, but pestilence passes. Steel can't cut it, but time can, you'll see." But Edmund saw fear in his master's eyes, a fear sharper than any blade, and he felt it in himself too. In battle, he had feared death, but a death he could see, fight, perhaps avoid. This was different. This was death in the very air he breathed. He dreamed of it at night, black swellings bursting, blood filling his throat, rats crawling across his chest as he lay helpless. When he woke, he half believed the dream had already begun. The bells rang without ceasing. At first, 1 toll for a villager gone, then 2, then 10. Then the bells tolled so often they blurred into a single endless groan, as if the metal itself grieved. Edmund rode with Sir Ewan and 2 others into the countryside. Lord Branwick had ordered them to keep peace, stop panic, prevent flight. Fine words, but the truth was simpler. Keep the peasants from abandoning their fields and leaving Branwick without rents. The first village they entered looked empty. Smoke still curled from chimneys, but no children ran, no women worked the wells. Doors hung open, chickens clucked unattended. "Where are they?" Edmund muttered. A moan answered. They found a man slumped against the church wall, belly swollen, neck bulging with a black, fist-sized bubo, his eyes rolled white, breath rattling. Ewan swore. "Stay back!" The man coughed, spraying blood onto the stones. He reached weakly toward Edmund. "Mercy, mercy, sir!" Edmund's gut twisted. His knightly oaths whispered in his mind, to protect the weak, to be merciful to the suffering. Yet his body recoiled. He dared not touch him. The man's hand clawed the air, then fell limp. His breath rattled out one last time. Edmund sat frozen in the saddle, staring at the corpse still twitching. They searched the huts. Inside one, they found a family. Father, mother, 3 children, all sprawled on the floor, faces blackened, flies thick on their lips. The smell made Edmund gag. In another, a woman still lived, rocking beside 2 dead sons, humming tunelessly. Her hair hung wild, her eyes glassy. When Edmund tried to speak, she screamed and hurled a stool at him. "Devils! Get out! Get out!" Ewan dragged him away. "Leave her! She'll be with them soon." Edmund glanced back, the sound of her wailing following him out into the empty street. At the second village, Branwick's steward had ordered huts torched, to cleanse the air. Edmund watched fire crawl over thatch, flames devouring the homes of the living and the dead alike. Some peasants wailed, clutching what little they had salvaged. Others sat blank-eyed, too far gone with grief to protest. One young boy clutched at Edmund's leg. "Sir, please, my sister, she's inside." Smoke belched from the hut. Ewan barked, "No! You'll not go in?" But Edmund's heart pounded. He saw the painted Madonna of his childhood, the oaths in the chapel, the vows to protect the helpless. He shoved into the hut. Smoke seared his lungs. He found the girl, no older than 10, already stiff, blackened lumps on her neck. Dead. He staggered back, choking, dragging himself into daylight. The boys stared up at him, hope flickering. Edmund shook his head. The boy wailed until the fire drowned his voice. Corpses lay by the roadside, some in shallow pits, some left where they fell. The air buzzed with flies, heavy with the sick, sweet stench of rot. Carts creaked past, piled with bodies like cordwood. Some still twitched, not dead, not alive, only waiting. Men with cloths tied around their faces shoved them on regardless. "Bring out your dead!" they cried, voices hoarse. Edmund clutched his reins tighter, bile rising in his throat. He had seen death in war, but this was endless, indiscriminate. Peasants, priests, children, mothers, knights. Death chose without care. And worse, death did not rest. Each corpse seemed to linger in the eyes of the living, haunting them, promising their turn would come. Back at Branwick's hall, panic brewed. Servants fled. Knights argued in hushed voices. Some said flee north, others swore to stay behind stone walls. Lord Branwick declared, "We will endure. God favours the strong. Keep the gates shut. Keep order." Yet Edmund could not forget the villages. The moaning man at the church wall, the woman rocking her dead, the boy crying for his sister, his oaths twisted inside him. How could a knight protect the weak when touching them meant death? How could he defend the church when even priests fell, coughing blood on the altar? At night he lay awake, staring at the rafters, whispering prayers that felt like dust in his mouth. And in his dreams the bells never ceased. It began with a maid, young, rosy-cheeked, always singing while she served the tables. One morning she coughed blood across the rushes. By nightfall her neck bulged with black lumps. She was gone by dawn. They carried her body out into the courtyard, but the air already seemed foul. Men muttered of bad humours, of corrupted winds. Branwick ordered incense burned in every chamber. The smoke choked the halls, but the coughing did not stop. Within days, 3 more fell, then 7. Then the steward himself, skin blotched purple, eyes rolling in fever. The castle stank of rot, though the bodies were carried out daily. And still the bells tolled. Panic gnawed the high table. One by one, Branwick's kin slipped away, carts laden, riding for country manors. "I'll not wait for death," one lord muttered, spurring his horse out the gate. Branwick roared, "Cowards! God will protect those who remain steadfast." But even his own wife begged him, pale and trembling, "My lord, please, we must go." The city, perhaps the mountains. Branwick struck the table with his fist. "We stay. This hall is mine. It will not fall." His voice rang strong, but Edmund saw fear behind his eyes. The halls grew quieter each day. Servants vanished, slipping away in the night. The kitchen stank of spoiled meat. Rats bold as cats on the tables. Fires burned lower. No one cared to tend them. Edmund walked the corridors and heard only coughing, moans behind closed doors, the faint scrape of a priest's chant over the dying. The chapel filled with bodies faster than the gravediggers could bury them. Corpses lay on cold stone, candles guttering above their stiff faces, the stink of incense mixed with the sweeter stench of death until Edmund gagged. Priests intoned, but their voices cracked with fear. Soon even they fell, coughing blood across the altar cloths. One evening, Edmund sat sharpening his blade, not because he needed it, but because the motion steadied him. He heard a scrabble. A rat scuttled across the rushes, fat, sleek, dragging a scrap of bloody linen. It darted into the shadows. Edmund's stomach turned. He had seen rats swarming over corpses in villages. He remembered the trader's tale, rats on ships, rats in markets, rats on corpses. He swung his boot, crushing it. Its body twitched, then stilled. But when he lifted his eyes, he saw 3 more watching from the corner. Ewan coughed for 3 days before admitting it. His face grew waxy, his neck swollen with a lump. Edmund sat by his pallet. "Master, don't call me that now," Ewan rasped. "No man masters death." He gripped Edmund's wrist with a hand still strong, though shaking. "Listen, we mocked you once, all of us. But you stood, you endured. You've been more knight than many with golden spurs." Edmund's throat tightened. "You'll recover." Ewan barked a laugh that turned to a wet cough. Blood speckled his lips. "Aye, we'll all recover, in heaven perhaps." By dawn he was gone. Edmund buried him in the courtyard with his own hands, though the grave was shallow and the ground frozen. He set the old knight's first sword across his chest. He had no words to speak. His oaths felt hollow as wind. Lord Branwick sat in his great chair, eyes sunk, lips pale. His hall was nearly empty now. "Where are my men?" he croaked. "Dead, my lord," Edmund answered softly. "Where are my kin?" "Fled." Branwick's eyes burned, though dimly. "Then I am lord of a corpse yard." He coughed, blood flecking his chin. Edmund stood silent. What words could be spoken? That night, Branwick's great hall echoed hollow, its benches bare, its hearth cold. Edmund walked the corridors alone. The stone walls that once seemed strong now felt like tombstones. Each room held only coughing, groaning, or silence. The banners above the dais hung limp in the stale air. The chapel candles guttered over heaps of corpses. Rats scuttled bold along the rafters. The great fortress of Branwick had become a mausoleum. And Edmund, the boy who once dreamed of knighthood, the man who had sworn to protect the weak, now stood among the dead, breathing their rot, knowing his turn would come. Edmund walked the corridors alone. The stone walls that once seemed strong now felt like tombstones. Each room held only coughing, groaning, or silence. The banners above the dais hung limp in the stale air. The chapel candles guttered over heaps of corpses. Rats scuttled bold along the rafters. The great fortress of Branwick had become a mausoleum. And Edmund, the boy who once dreamed of knighthood, the man who had sworn to protect the weak, now stood among the dead, breathing their rot, knowing his turn would come. Edmund walked the corridors alone. The stone walls that once seemed strong now felt like tombstones. Each room held only coughing, groaning, or silence. The banners above the dais hung limp in the stale air. The chapel candles guttered over heaps of corpses. Rats scuttled bold along the rafters. The great fortress of Branwick had become a mausoleum. And Edmund, the boy who once dreamed of knighthood, the man who had sworn to protect the weak, now stood among the dead, breathing their rot, knowing his turn would come. On the third day of his wandering, the gates rattled. Edmund climbed the wall and saw a cluster of peasants outside. Thin, wild-eyed, clutching bundles. "Sir, sir," one cried up, "let us in, good knight. The pestilence takes us on the road. Have mercy." Edmund's heart twisted. He saw women with infants, old men leaning on sticks, children clinging to skirts. They looked like ghosts already. But he remembered the maid, the steward, Sir Ewan, Branwick himself. He remembered the lumps, the blood. He knew if he opened the gates, the sickness would flood in again. What little remained of the hall would vanish. He gripped the cold stone. "I cannot," he croaked down. "Forgive me, I cannot." The cries rose, pleading, then cursing, then fading as the desperate trudged on. Edmund stood watching long after they were gone, guilt burning like fever in his chest. That night he sat in the great hall, a single candle burning on the vast table. The benches were empty, the banners above sagged with dust. His spurs gleamed faintly in the flicker. He whispered his vows aloud as if speaking them could make them real again. To defend the Holy Church, to uphold the law, to protect the weak, to be merciful. His voice faltered. The church lay rotting with corpses. The law had fled with Branwick's kin. The weak begged at his gate, and he had turned them away. Mercy was death. He laughed then, a raw, broken sound. The words were ashes, the vows were chains that bound him to nothing. On the fourth night without sleep, feverish from lack of food, Edmund thought he saw them. Sir Ewan, standing tall, blood on his lips, sword in hand. The maid, eyes wide, buboes swelling on her neck. The boy from the burned village, clutching his sister's charred doll. They stood at the edges of the firelight, staring, silent, accusing. Edmund gripped his sword. "I tried," he whispered. "I tried. What more could I do?" The phantoms did not answer. Only the fire cracked. Only the rats scuttled. And Edmund wept, head bowed on the table, his spurs digging into the empty rushes below. On the fifth day, unable to bear the walls any longer, Edmund saddled his horse. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds. The gates creaked as he forced them open. He rode into the countryside. The villages were emptier still, doors open, corpses slumped in chairs, carts abandoned on roadsides, dogs gnawed bones, crows burst from roofs in black flocks. He rode past them all, hollow, spurred onward by nothing but the need to escape silence. But silence rode with him. The first sign was the ache in his groin. He had ridden for days, circling empty villages, hoping to find a soul still alive, a voice to answer his own. Instead, he found only carrion. His horse grew gaunt, his bread mouldy, his mind ragged with exhaustion. When the ache came, he thought it only strain from riding too long, but by nightfall a lump swelled hot beneath his skin. By morning another bulged under his arm, his throat burned, his breath rasped. Edmund knew then his turn had come. He staggered into a ruined chapel by the roadside, its roof half fallen, its altar overturned. Rats skittered among the broken pews. There he laid himself down, spurs still strapped, sword still at his side. He had no priest, no companions, no squire to fetch water. Only the smell of dust and rot, only the faint light through shattered windows. He laughed once, weakly, at the thought. A knight of Branwick, of Greyford, dying in rags in a ruin, with no banner above him, no songs, no prayers. So much for oaths. It burned him from within. Sweat drenched him, then cold shook him until his teeth rattled. His head swam with visions, the painted Madonna from his childhood, the poacher's dying eyes, Sir Ewan's last cough, Branwick's wife begging to flee, the boy clutching at his leg outside the gates. They crowded around him, whispering, accusing. He tried to answer them, but his voice cracked into coughs. Blood flecked his lips, his breath stank of iron and rot. He clawed at his sword, gripping the hilt as if steel could anchor him. His hand trembled too much to lift it. The swellings blackened, bursting with foul pus. His body convulsed with pain so sharp he cried out like a child. His vision blurred, his tongue swelled, his words slurred. In one fevered moment he thought he saw his mother's face, not the painted Madonna, but the woman he had never known, smiling faintly, beckoning. "Was I enough?" he croaked. His voice rasped into silence. He lay back, the ruined chapel spinning above him. The candle he had lit guttered, then died. The last light was the sun bleeding red through a crack in the roof. Edmund's breath rattled once, twice, then ceased. The sword slid from his grip. His spurs gleamed faintly in the dusk. And there, in the dust and ruin, the last Greyford knight lay still. Not fallen in battle, not celebrated in song, but claimed by the same pestilence that felled kings and peasants alike. Days later, a passerby might have found him, or not. Perhaps the rats stripped him. Perhaps the roof caved and buried him in stone. Perhaps no one ever knew where Sir Edmund of Greyford fell. But it mattered little. For in that year, in that plague, one knight's death was no more noticed than a drop of rain in a storm. The age of chivalry ended not with trumpets, but with coughing, silence, and rot. That is why it truly sucks to be a knight during the Bubonic Plague. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe.